there's one good, correct me audience, I'm sorry. Like people can correct me and get mad at me if they want. But I think there's one good Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C.
Oh,
It's a kind of a higher end Chinese restaurant. And guess what it's called?
it better not be called like Great Wall. What's it? What?
No, it's called Astoria because it's like they know. They know where the home of the
Wow.
good Chinese food is. The
Wow.
restaurant knows.
Wow. New York to the world. Wow.
Yep,
Wow.
yep. And they got like the subway tile, kind of blue and white subway tile font and
They know what they're
everything.
doing.
Like 100%,
They did their
100%.
research. Yeah. I hope you know
Exactly.
that. Like, you're never going to be able to get there without a line now, because once people see it, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, and people are going to go, it's going to go
No,
viral.
there's already a line. Pro tip, if you happen to be in DC and you want to go to Astoria, go basically when it opens at 5 p.m. I used to walk past it on my way home from the Rising Studios. And so I had a kind of a good like barometer on when it would be busy and when it wouldn't be busy. And the key is basically going when it's open. Just pro tip.
I, I'm still,
Andre, oh,
I'm
go
still
ahead.
shocked at the fact that it opens at 5 p.m. Like, that is, wow. Wow.
Yeah, like why was it ever closed basically? Yeah, it's a different world. I will say this also though. I will say that when I went away to college, I miss New York. I love New York. I'm still, you hear it in my voice. I have like a love-hate relationship with whether or not I should turn around and go back. But there was a time when I'm not living in New York and I'm visiting New York, I do get what people say about it being overwhelming. I see the dirt, like I see I see the stuff that we inure ourselves to. I look at the accounts I used to follow because they like to make the best of a small apartment. And I look at them now and I'm like, oh, the way I was deluding myself into thinking the fact that there was like a red spray paint smear across my kitchen cabinet was like normal and good. And I was paying out the rear for this West Village
Character.
apartment with full
Character.
spray paint and like a 5 square foot kitchen.
That's character. That's what makes the good stories, when you reflect on it.
I guess so. I guess so. Andre Easton, welcome to Bad Faith Podcast.
Happy to be here.
You're here because you have decided to take up the mantle of running against one of the most unpopular representatives in Congress, at least in the eyes of leftists, people who are sort of Bernie identified at least at one point in their lives, people who are, democratic socialists, and people who frankly are just pro-Palestine and overwhelmed and disgusted by the conformity with which New York politicians in particular have, on the whole, pledged fidelity to Israel in its choice to commit a genocide. Ritchie Torres. So tell me a little bit about when you made the decision to run.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting concept, right? Because as somebody who has lived in the Bronx my whole life, it isn't until you become a bit older when you actually encounter the state apparatus, like when you try to navigate some of the systems and you realize just how backwards things are and like how cumbersome they are. I think the idea of running never really occurred to me as a younger person, but I looking at how, I guess, easy of a path that he's had in doing the bare minimum and just being openly corrupt and not really facing, the type of pressure that would be warranted from, people as resilient and as hardy as those that live in the Bronx here. Really, it's important for me to understand and just to put forth a vision for what the district could be like. And I think that, what we have to offer is really speaks to the concerns and the needs of the working people in this district.
Well, how much did shifting attitudes around Israel and Gaza motivate you to run? Because it does seem like Torres is particularly vulnerable in this moment. I mean, he's been the sort of bête noire of the left for a really long time. But this moment, especially with the ascendancy of Zohran Mamdani, the fact that Zohran ran this very unapologetic, we can talk about some more recent statements, of course, but, on the whole ran this unapologetic campaign where he defended slogans like globalized intifada. He was protesting on campus with pro-Palestine protesters, all of this stuff. And that it was used as a cudgel to hurt him by his opponents, but it seemed to actually redound to his favor. And it has made Ritchie Torres, it seems, be a little bit quieter than he's been in the past, perhaps reflecting a vulnerability there. Did any of that inform your choice to run now?
Oh yeah, yeah, hugely. I think we're in a moment right now where we're seeing the fruits of organized struggle. In defense of the people in Palestine, right? Like we've seen a dramatic shift from October 2023 up until now, where things that were taboo, in the early, I guess the early moments after this became a national conversation, those are things that don't even fly anymore, right? Like it's hard for people to continue to use the same kind of like Zionist talking points, in public discourse without being shamed and like exposed for like just the flat out lies that they are. So yeah, I think Torres's position is in a particular state of weakness, right alongside the strength of a candidate like Zoran Mamdani because of largely the same forces, right? The coalition of forces throughout the country, but like in New York City in particular, that have been, on a daily basis organizing and having conversations in the streets and having rallies and doing, teach-ins and really helping to elevate the consciousness of the workers in the city about what is the true nature of this conflict that we have been taught for so many years is something that it's complicated, or it's something that you can't understand, or like if you don't identify as a particular faith, you don't have the authority to speak on. It's been the organized efforts of the mass movements of anti-Zionist Jews and the Palestinian diaspora and just the broader left organized movement that has been calling for an end to the genocide. And I think that has made it possible to be in this position of vulnerability, and as well as Zoran Mandani to be able to have these open, unapologetic positions that should be, well accepted and should have been well accepted, in 1948,
Sure.
but are just now coming into, more popularity in the mainstream just because of just how actively underdeveloped, our consciousness is, particularly in New York, which, has a very high, largest population of, Jewish citizens. So it's a particularly difficult place to have those conversations. But I think this is probably the perfect place to have those conversations because we can really sit down and talk face to face about the things that, we are made to fight over and attack each other, behind screens. So, we definitely have a very unique position to play in New York City, in solidarity with the people in Palestine and just oppressed people around the world. Like so much of it comes right through our dollars in our pockets.
Yeah, well, it's often said that New York has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. But in terms of the demographics of the city, it also has, the largest Muslim population in the United States. New York is, I think, about 12% Jewish. It's like 20% Black and 20% Latino, approximately. You might have more specific numbers than I have off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And certainly in the Bronx, those numbers are even, the numbers of Black and brown people are even more overrepresented. It's also, people have also drawn attention to the contrast between Ritchie Torres's focus on Israel when he is also representing one of the poorest districts in the United States. I think it has the highest child poverty rate in the United States. And so I do wonder if you've had an opportunity to talk to the residents of the Bronx, how they feel about Ritchie Torres's political focus being on issues that are so far away from their immediate economic concerns.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a huge sticking point, and this interview taking place exactly 1 week after we launched the campaign. Um, Almost without fail, every person that has approached me in person or even online, when they found out that I was running for this particular district, has they lead with their deep-seated hatred of Richie Torres, and not simply because of his his collusion and defense of the state of Israel and their genocide, but also just his failure to actually meet the needs of, as you identified earlier, the poorest congressional district in the country, right? And it's such a disgusting framework that is used to apply to the people of District 15 and the people of the Bronx more broadly, right? You were talking demographics earlier, right? The Bronx is the blackest borough, right? Like we have the highest percentage of any borough of black residents and Latino residents as well. So it's so disgusting to know that with this place, with all the history that comes through the Bronx and is made every day, to know that the person that has been in charge of, representing us is, taking, beyond the $1.4 million that Richie Torres receives from, the Israel lobby. He also receives a 1.5 million from the real estate lobby, which again is top of mind for most workers in New York and particularly in the Bronx, right? Who spend a disproportionate amount of their money or their income on rent. So all of these struggles, all of these challenges that the workers in this district are feeling are just really coalesced in the image and the idea of what Richie Torres is putting out. So he's got no shortage of haters, and legitimate. It's not like these are not people that just don't like his face. Like they have legitimate grievances with his leadership, or lack thereof.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about those grievances because I think there's a lot of there's competing narratives that are happening between the left and the center establishment wing of the Democratic Party, and certainly the right has their own framing about what political priorities are actually held by folks in these competitive districts, in races where competitions might be happening. And I don't know if you saw, there was recently this report that the Democratic Party put out that's being framed once again as the Democrats have to move to the right on cultural issues, kind of mumps the word on economic issues, and the pattern that has now existed for decades, this of neoliberalism, where Democrats will over-index on cultural issues to basically obscure the extent to which they're unwilling to move to the left on economic issues. And this report is kind of going up narratively against the model of Zohran Mamdani, who has had an enormous amount of message discipline and making this an affordability election, has people chanting back at him that we're going to make, buses free, that we're going to stabilize the rent. It's a very clear economic populist message. He started out with this sort of viral video in which he asked specifically people who had chosen to vote for Trump in New York why they had done so. And what emerged was this economic theme that he then chose to run on. And so I do wonder, what do you see as your own theme of your race? And has it been similarly informed by conversations that you've had with folks in your district?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think the, and I've said this before, right? The billionaire agenda, I think it's popularly represented as being a Trump agenda, but we also understand that the same shareholders, the same donors for both the Democrats and Republicans, they go to the same places, right? Like they might be at the same Chinese restaurant, right? And they are ultimately have the same interests. So they have to use the apparatus that they have, the media, to be able to put out this narrative that suggests that the problem that we experience every day when we go to the grocery store, when we see our light bill come in, they have to try to obscure the reality of our lived experiences as workers with this narrative that the problem isn't this, it's something else, right? Like they have to continue to, astroturf, to use this term. I don't even know if that's the proper term, but they have to foreground this narrative that the problems that we're facing, that we feel on a daily basis, are not what we're actually feeling. So they have to continuously gaslight and say, it's actually over here. It's actually immigrants. It's actually something else that is other than the obvious conclusion, which is that the income that we receive is increasingly more having a difficult time covering our day-to-day needs. So the program that we put forward is rooted in this idea that the people in the Bronx, in this district, have a right to be able to put forth their own vision, to be able to speak boldly about the program that they actually want, as opposed to being stuck in this cycle where all we do is try to prevent the backslide, right? Like, how do we try to continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, which just puts us in a worse position every election cycle because we're even further from the things that we need because we thought that taking half measures was actually going to move us in the right direction when in reality every election cycle the gains that we have become up in jeopardy, right? So like even right now, like we're looking at November 1st, right? Potentially 42 million Americans, 1.7 million New Yorkers are stand to lose their SNAP benefits, right? Like, how does a system that even allows for something like that to even be a possibility among, some of the hardest working people in this country, why should anybody be in a position where they're not able to secure their next meal in the richest country in the world, right? Like these are the things that people are starting to ask themselves. And we have to be able to move beyond these party politics, right? Because both red and blue, the bill comes in. When Con Ed tells me that the price has gone up, I got to pay it, right? When the water bill goes up because we're using more water to cool data centers, I still got to pay it regardless of who's in office or not. And I think more and more people in the working class in this district and across the country are starting to recognize that the problems that they're facing are primarily economic and are rooted in the system and the way that the wealth is distributed in this country. So, our platform is here to give people a tangible program that they can say, this would actually make sense. This is actually possible, as opposed to just, hoping that people will vote every now and then for something that is slightly less worse than what they have currently.
So I should mention, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're running as an independent?
Correct. Yes, I am.
And we've, talked, and maybe not on the show, but at least on a live stream with Jose Vega, who's been running for a while. My understanding is he's actually running as a Democrat, right? And so is Delarny Nimmerin, who will also be appearing on the show later on. So you're the only person running outside of the two-party system. Talk to me about your choice to do that.
I think that's wonderful. I think the Bronx deserves to have a robust political landscape. So I think if other people want to put forth their vision, that is ultimately a good thing for the voters and the workers in the Bronx. I think the ultimate benefit of being an independent candidate is that I don't have to be beholden to the interests of the established Democrat forces, right? Like I'm beholden to the platform that we put forth, which is a platform rooted in the working class and in our experience, working with the people on the ground. So I'm not. We can take positions that are, the correct positions, even if they are not, advantageous to the donors that keep the Democratic or the Republican parties running. Like, October 8th, 2023, the PSL, along with, other people that were conscientious objectors, right? The working class was out in the streets for Palestine, right? Like it wasn't something that we had to, debate on whether or not we would stand up for them. And we did that because we have the ability to be independent. Like we are only beholden to the working class. And those are the people that fund this campaign and allow us to do all of the things that we're doing. It's just regular working class people that know what they want to see. So being independent allows us to, we skip over all of those limitations that are tied to the party politics, right? Because we know, you and I both know that the things that are necessary for the working class are directly counter to the interests of the billionaire class.
Well, it sounds like you might be familiar enough with me to know that I am a big fan of people who run outside of the duopoly and that I have a lot of skepticism about the extent to which people who run within the party are going to be allowed to succeed. Of course, the pushback that I always get, and that I'm sure you've heard as well, is that structurally it becomes much more difficult to run a successful campaign. And by successful, they mean a winning campaign running from the outside. In the context of a presidential election, for instance, people will argue that it's very difficult to get name recognition if you can't access the Democratic Party run debates. And if for that reason alone, it makes more sense to do a sort of entry a strategy accompanied by maybe a dirty break, strategies that have been discussed at length in this podcast. There's different concerns that happen at a lower federal level or at a state level. So talk to me about how you respond to folks that say, well, what's the point of running as an independent and making the challenge so much more difficult for yourself?
I love that you foregrounded that question by identifying the criteria for success. Because there's this popular idea that, like, people choose the candidate that they think is going to win, which I think is really an affront to democracy, right? Like, if we lived in a democracy, you would choose the candidate that represents the values that you have, right? That represents the interests and the positions that you want to see represented. And the two-party system does not allow for anything outside of what is the prescribed structures to exist. So I think that first defining that success for us does not look the same as like somebody that might be running for a major party, right? Like, ultimately, there are hundreds of thousands of people in this district that recognize the flaws in the two-party system and in this system of capitalism. And ultimately, we want people to activate themselves. There has to be a fundamental shift in the way that people relate themselves to the structures of power, right? Power only comes from the masses of people when they are organized to actually assert their will and make it real. Right now, we are told that the best power that you have is to vote every now and then for one person that you think is going to actually be able to move your agenda forward, as opposed to the power that comes from a community that knows each other intimately, a community that is actually activated to put forth the vision that they need to see in reality. And that's really what we're offering people. We're offering people. We're going to be on the ballot, right? Like, we're mobilizing people to be able to actually participate in a system that they've only been spectators. And I think the Bronx is probably the perfect example of that, right? Like, we typically have like some of the lower turnouts of all the boroughs, and that's largely due to the fact that people feel jaded. They feel that the system has failed them, and they feel like there isn't something that they're actually going to get out of this process. And we're offering them the opportunity to struggle, because history is only made by the organized masses. Like, there's no other way. Like, it isn't a single person. Again, it was the organized masses of people that made it possible for Zoran to capitalize on that and push his position, the rightful position, in defense of the people of Palestine. An anti-genocidal position shouldn't be something that is controversial in any era. But the time that we're living in, after decades of underdevelopment, after decades of political misleadership, people have to be brought back into a state of consciousness that actually allows them to stand up for what they believe in. And we are offering that on the ground for the people of the Bronx.
Crystal Ball and Kyle Kalinske recently interviewed Ro Khanna, and he made a really interesting admission, which is that the Congressional Progressive Caucus used to have a rule that said they couldn't take any position on Israel-Palestine. And the argument was, well, we got this coalition together that all agrees on Medicare for all and raising the minimum wage. Don't spoil it by introducing this divisive issue.
For the longest time, I don't mind sharing this, we had these rules in the Progressive Caucus that you couldn't take a position on anything dealing with Israel and Gaza.
Oh, my God.
Really? And it was like, well, we've got a diverse coalition of progressives who support Medicare for all and support free public college. And so we can't take a position on it. I don't even know technically if we've gotten rid of that provision or not. But like, you can't separate and just be like, well, we're going to be on domestic policy, but we don't care if innocent Venezuelan fishermen are blown up, and the Colombian president is out there saying that a fisherman was blown up by the United States, and that doesn't really matter to us. Like, no great leader, Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, no one has said, like, I'm going to separate my morality. They have a clarity of conviction, and they apply it. So then none of us in Congress obviously are as great as those individuals, but we should aspire to some level for moral consistency. And the great thing about voters today is they actually can sense that. The first thing they want to know is, like, does this person have a conviction, a core sense of how he views or she views the world? And I think that's where the disconnect is with the Democratic Party. So somehow getting people to see that these aren't foreign policy issues, these are human issues, is key.
And I would argue that that exact kind of maneuvering is exemplary of why I have skepticism of the ability to move within the Democratic Party. And as I'm sure you're aware, there has been an ongoing discussion about the extent to which Zohran Mamdani's sort of maneuvering around this issue in recent days and weeks, which has taken on a character that was different than the posture that he adopted prior to winning the primary, is also reflective of the kinds of pressures that exist when you're trying to operate within the Democratic Party. And so I would like to know your feeling about some of the criticisms of Mamdani that have arisen of late, and, you know, maybe what you think, from your perspective, is happening here.
Yeah. No, it definitely, it appears as though, like, the closer you get to the finish line, it's like, okay, now you guys have fun. It's time to, like, cut that out. It's almost like, you know, how people, you know, even with dating, right? Like, they'll be like, okay, we're not really serious about this, but it's like, I'm ready to get married now. So I'm going to cut all of these, you know, childish, youthful ideas out. I'm going to put that to the side. I'm going to get serious. And I think that it's definitely insulting to people who have, you know, put their lives on the line, their livelihoods on the line, really standing for what they believe in, which is an end to genocide, again, which should not be a controversial position at all. I think that it really lays bare the limitations of operating within the duopoly, because ultimately, if your position is bad for business, literally, if your position, you know, hurts the profits of those people that, you know, paid for your campaign, then you ultimately cannot take that position. And I think that it really places the broader American working class in a difficult position, because what it suggests is that we have to put the requirement of us standing in solidarity with the international working class secondary to our immediate material interests. And I think that as long as that relationship is in play, then it's going to be hard for us to really stand up in the ways that we need to, especially as we, you know, are observing in real time the ongoing escalations in the Caribbean, right, where we have, you know, extrajudicial assassinations of Venezuelan, you know, people with no evidence, like complete, you know, flaunting of the law in our face. And it's hard for us to stand in solidarity and say we support that, we support these people's rights to self-determination, while also, you know, actively supporting candidates that are working counter to those same interests. So, like, we have to start our, I guess, the seed of our consciousness has to be rooted in the global South solidarity, right? Like, we have to be internationalists. And again, in the Bronx, right? Like, I'm Jamaican. We see what's happening in with Melissa right now, right? How, you know, the Caribbean is completely devastated because of this hurricane that is exacerbated by the, you know, the warming of the climate and the climate disasters that are, you know, being further advanced by the militarism. Like, all of these things are intertwined, and we have to be able to talk about this. We have to be able to have conversations on the bus while we're on our way to work with our neighbors about these things, because we cannot simply seek to advance the interests of the working class in America while abandoning our obligations to the human working class around the world. Like, there's no two worlds that we can live in. It has to be everyone, or it's none of us. And that's really what more and more workers are waking up on a regular basis. And we need a space to channel that, and a path that actually puts us in right relationship with our workers around the world,
Yeah, I think what makes it hard is that, there's two Zorons, and unfortunately, the chronology paints a picture of a shift sort of away from the left. I won't say to the right, that's a little bit aggressive and extreme, but directionally, that's those are the polls. So, for example, there's a clip that's been going around. The conservatives hate it. I love it. Of him talking in 2023 along those lines about how connected these struggles are. And he makes the point that you have to understand that when the NYPD puts its boots on your neck, that boot has been laced by the IDF. And
the importance for me of international solidarity is that it takes me out of the American political landscape and reminds me just how tame some of the things are that I'm actually calling for. That I support.
True.
And it reminds me of the necessity of grounding ourselves in the struggles as opposed to the fights around the struggles. For anyone to care about these issues, we have to make them hyperlocal. We have to make clear that when the boot of the NYPD is on your neck, it's been laced by the IDF. We're in a country where those connections abound, especially in New York City. You have so many opportunities to make clear the ways in which that struggle over there is tied to capital's interest over here.
Conservatives are running with this. It's a bar, right?
That homeboy he got some lyrics.
I know they're keeping these quotes. I'm like, okay, maybe he should have stayed in that hip hop career. Like, I don't know. So, the conservatives are having a field day with that. I think it's a great line. But in contrast, he's being criticized in the last week or so for keeping Jessica Tishon as police commissioner. She's someone who has been very vocal in support of Israel and critical of college students at NYU, Columbia, other schools in New York, and has participated and endorsed the police crackdown on them. He's also been recently criticized for standing with State Senator Liz Kruger at an event at which she says this man is not an anti-Semite, and introducing herself as a Jew and a Zionist, raising questions as to the role of self-described Zionists in the movement. And can you be in solidarity with someone who describes the Zionist as you're advocating for Palestine? Are we going to participate in this sort of redefinition of Zionism that also Bernie Sanders seems to be engaging with, that ignores the extent to which maintaining a ethnic and religious controlled state in the Arab world is necessitated by apartheid and ethnic cleansing?
Exactly.
Right? So I wanted to be more specific about these, criticisms of Zoran I'm alluding to, both in fairness to him and in fairness to our conversation. So I put those points on the table, and I'd love to get your view on what you think is happening here, and kind of how the public should interpret it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that's really good. The question is good, rather. And I like how you brought that those direct quotes in. I think the responsibility for understanding how these political shifts are happening, I think, lies with those of us that have a understanding of the forces that produce these moments that we're in. And I think that, again, in our organizing efforts, we have to continuously work to, again, rehumanize the workers in this country. I think we have been so actively underdeveloped. Again, as a teacher, right? Like, there are certain things that we literally cannot talk about, right? Like there are boundaries in which we are able to deliver certain types of lessons and messaging, right? Because that's a form of, the media is a form of education in itself. And if people don't ever get exposed to these ideas in a way that they're actually able to challenge them and to really interrogate them, then all they're left with is very surface and shallow level understandings. which, kind of goes back to the point that I was making earlier about how the owners of media are able to push out their narrative. They're able to reframe the way we understand things. Like they've taken Zionism and made it into something else, right? Like even though there's been like a United Nations definition of what Zionism is, and that's been there for decades, but now they're using their entrenched power to impose their own definitions on what these things mean. And I think that it's going to be up to the people that are on the ground, the people that put the support into Zoran's campaign, the people who voted for him and canvassed for him and, that are still canvassing for him. All of those volunteers are going to have to decide what relationship they want their views and their values to have to the mayoral administration. Because ultimately, it's only going to be the masses, the people who put Zoran into office that are going to be the ones that are charged with, holding him accountable. And I think that's why, political parties are so important, because the movements are the consciousness of the working class, and the movements contain the historical memory of the working class. Like if you look even historically, looking at major figures, we look at Tommy, what's the brother, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, right? Put the black fist up. They could have only done that if there was a robust Black liberation struggle in the background, like giving them guidance on that, right? Like you don't get this, these singular leaders or figures that are taking the right positions that we know they should be taking if there is not a strong movement on the other side, giving them that direction and holding them accountable to the things that they doing. So I think to the extent that we see Zoran, remain in the principal positions that he started with in 2023, and that we know based on his history and his dad's history that he has inside of him, the only thing that's going to be able to keep him accountable is a mass movement of people that are organized with the right understanding to actually put pressure on them to do that. Like the power has to flow from the bottom up, because right now the billionaires are using their access to these streams of consciousness that they have in the media to blast out messages that are counter to what we believe. They're putting these messages out that are wildly unpopular. They're attacking people that are standing up against these things, while also claiming to be supporting free speech. They're jailing people for simply disagreeing with their broader policies. They're snatching people based on them looking like they might be from a different country. All of these efforts are there to discourage the working class from organizing and taking to the streets, which has historically been our only true source of power that actually allows us to change the direction of this country and to secure the rights that we have. But I think the question that people have to ask themselves about, Zoran and his tenure is, what does it mean to have a socialist mayor in a capitalist city, right? Like we have to be able to bring our questions back to the system that actually, promotes one idea over the other. And until we really have a raised consciousness of the working class, it's going to be hard for us to sustain the type of movements that will be necessary to transform the way that wealth is distributed in this country into a way that Black people and immigrants and people that are marginalized actually have a say and can live a life with dignity. And that's really what we're fighting for,
Yeah, and this is the concern, right? That movement energy that might otherwise be oppositional to the destructive power systems in New York are being diverted into a kind of electoralism, which specifically reifies the corporate Democratic Party. So it is wonderful and inspiring that Zoran motivated the 50,000 volunteers that came out for him to help him win the primary. But what does it mean if the knee-jerk reaction for those volunteers whose numbers have swelled to even greater numbers, if their primary duty, it seems, is to defend Zoran at all cost and prioritize winning? And I know this is a hot take, and I know what my critics say. The critics say, of course, the goal should be winning. The left won't take a W. The left don't want to actually, attain anything. They just want to complain about everything on the internet. But I am not so sanguine about the value of winning an office if you have to compromise away too much. And I am very optimistic about what it means to run for office in a way that radicalizes potentially thousands or millions of people in a city like New York to understanding how corrupt the institutions that paint themselves as left, i.e. the Democratic Party, really are. I think that what Zoran did in the primary was very radicalizing. He almost single-handedly shifted the narrative on Gaza dramatically to the right, mainstreamed a understanding of Israel as an apartheid state that should not exist as an apartheid state,
Correct.
in a way that I think was remarkable and enormously valuable. And I might even say more valuable than anything he might accomplish in office, given that he's going to be operating within the Democratic Party with, Jessica Tisch as the police commissioner and yada, 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 on down the line. Apologizing to the NYPD for saying that they were racist when they quite clearly are, and all of the things. Right?
You got to kiss the ring, it's like,
And if you have to kiss the ring, then, is this a party that I want to join? I mean, James Lee, who's been on the podcast before, actually, is it James Lee? I can't tell whose account this is. I don't think that's James Lee's, actually. It's Good Vibe Politic tweeted in response to the state senator who, describes herself as a Jew and as a Zionist and in solidarity with Zoran. He asked the question, at what point does this go from being, oh, he's doing what he can do to insulate himself from anti-Semitism allegations, to this is a man willing to opportunistically campaign with and align himself with Zionists to gain even the slightest possible electoral edge? And I think that's a good question, especially when he's up so much in polls, and especially when, again, I really struggle as a Black New Yorker to get past the prioritization of just a demographically smaller group of people in New York than the city, which is like 50% Black and brown. It's like insane. We haven't even brought in Asian New Yorkers. Like it's just insane. Like, what are we even doing? And it feels, I'm sorry, sometimes it feels borderline anti-Semitic to even say that, but it's obvious. Like, it's crazy that we're like being, the whole city apparently is supposed to be led around by the tail by 12% of the population, many of whom themselves are pro-Zoran and not Zionists themselves.
Yeah. It's that same narrative. Like they're forcing out something that is not a reality. It's a fabricated reality that like we're meant to just accept. But no, I completely hear what you're saying, right? Like there's the quote unquote left. And I think that I have so much issues with like, I think broadly we have a really loose understanding of what qualifies as left. And I think it's become even more murky when we have objectively socialist, claiming candidates that are wildly popular, but are also doing things that we would see as right wing in other contexts. It just really makes it difficult for people to really have a sense of like what is right and what is left when so many things just get labeled, right? Like you could, and I'm not even going to get into that, but I think.
Wait, was that a Graham Planter subtweet or Plattner subtweet? Or what's happening?
I just want to say I don't have any tattoos at all. And I don't have any questionable ones, especially if I did, they would not be. It would probably be like an afro or like a black fist or like, the traditional outline of the continent of Africa over my heart.
Well,
like,
so certain people would come for you over a fist tattoo. So
I'll take it. I'll take it. No, but I really think that's the question that people have to ask themselves. Like, is it that we want a good guy in a bad system? Or do we want a system that does not allow for bad guys, right? Do we want a system that has the capacity to move our needs forward materially? Because we're just scraping by. And again, 272,000 people in this district, District 15, stand to lose their SNAP benefits on November 1st. What does that do for the families that are trying to feed their children? What does that do for the people that are just making it from check to check? Like, what does that do for the people who make the city run? As you mentioned, right, the city is largely Black and brown. And culturally, so much of New York culture, right, from the Bronx, right, we're talking salsa music, we're talking hip hop born in this city, in this borough, and to know that the people who created some of the most beautiful art, the most beautiful experiences in the world, are still scraping by in a system, in an existence that is on par with modern day slavery. Like, let's keep it a stack. Let's say the things that are true. And I think it's insulting that when you look at a black voter, a black worker, that the best that they have to choose from is this guy, Ritchie Torres, or just the best they can hope for is to have somebody that might speak to something that might eventually at some point manifest for a lessening of the worst conditions that they're experiencing, as opposed to putting forth a bold vision, right, that actually meets the moment that we're in. Because again, the right wing is on a rampage, and they are seeking to demobilize us in every possible way, which is why Trump switched from calling Zoran a socialist to a communist. He's like, oh shit, socialist is too popular. I got to hit him with something harder. And he knows that the American working class is really heavily propagandized against communism. So if he can associate these populist economic policies with communism, because he knows that the broader, Americans are propagandized against that, then he can use that to attack him. So it just also shows that even when you try to play by the rules, when you try to play within his duopoly, they're still going to attack you. They're still going to crush you. They're still going to hit you with the full weight of their force, as if you were a communist. So you might as well, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to attack me on the basis of the allegation of me being a communist, then why not put forward something that would actually be on a communist agenda, right? Universal housing, universal childcare, universal, education, like healthcare. These things are not only possible, but they're very tangible and they're very doable. It's just that we've capitulated to the worst sentiment, right? And that's the other thing that capitalism does, is it promotes this cynical view of the world. It promotes this idea that the world can only be as it is, and we should try to stop it from getting worse, as opposed to the optimistic, the more realistic worldview that says that, the world is what we can make it. And we, as the workers who produce all of the labor that generates the trillions of wealth in this country, we should be in charge of controlling how that wealth is distributed, where that wealth goes, and who actually benefits from it. Because to know that my neighbors are in a position of food insecurity, and then to know that the prescribed response to people responding logically to food insecurity is going to be further crackdown, further police militarization, and stop and frisk and harassing of poor people trying to secure their daily needs. If we know that that's what's on the other side, we should take the position of putting forth a vision that's going to give us what we need, as opposed to just trying to stop things from getting a little bit worse. And we need so much more than what can be offered within the confines of this existing system.
So, Andre, I'm getting the sense that you identify as a socialist?
Yeah, capital S socialist.
All right. Okay. Talk to me a little bit about your background, how you came to your politics. I heard you mention PSL earlier. Any sort of affiliations, membership organizations, things like that you belong to that might help the audience better understand your politics?
For sure. Yeah. So first I mentioned that I'm a teacher, right? I'm a public school teacher. I teach English. I got to say earlier, you dropped the word sanguine.
Sanguine, yeah.
Sanguine, nah. You was cooking with that one. I had to write it down. I was like, nah, I love me a good word. I'm gonna drop that some point this week. I don't know how, but I'm gonna sprinkle it in. But no, I am a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I have been since 2023. Prior to that, I'd been affiliated. I had been, a lot of people I know and love were members of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And I had kept going to different things. I too was, inspired by Bernie. I was first inspired by, Obama's promises for, universal health care, all these things that he promised and then ultimately let people down on. I too had that moment of being jaded, like, this whole system is garbage. But then, Occupy Wall Street happened. And then, Trayvon happened and Black Lives Matter happened. And then I started to see people actually get activated for what they cared about. But it wasn't until really 2022 when I was actually watching, and I got to give a shout out to Black Liberation Media. Shout out to Jared and Geechee and Renee and all of the beautiful people over there. And I was
Listeners will
watching.
remember Jared Ball from the recent stream we did about One Battle Again and Again.
I got it. Yes, 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 yes. I got to go back and catch that because there's definitely some a larger conversation needs to be had about like representation of Black aesthetics and radical aesthetics in media. But it was a program that I was watching that Jared was hosting where he had a member on from PSL that was talking about they were running a program to free a political prisoner, who's now an ancestor, Michelle McGee, who was one of the people that were implicated in the Marin County court incident with George Jackson, along with Angela Davis. And I had learned that this guy was still in jail. I'm like, how do we still have political prisoners? And then when I found out that there was living political prisoners like Mumia Abu-Jamal, and the people that were talking about it were always involved in organizations, right? So learning about this campaign and that it was from somebody that was in the PSL and already being familiar with the PSL, I said, I need to get involved with this. And, they helped to shape my politics and understand my understanding of like how the world has been constructed to this day. And, really, they solidified my break with publicly identifying as a Democrat, right? Because I know that when I found out that Obama put a $2 million bounty on Assata Shakur's head, I was like, nah, pack him up. Pack him up. You know what I mean? Like, nah, you got to get up out of here. Like, if you are the foremost, Democrat, Black man, Black wife, Black daughters, like everything about you is like the aspiration for somebody of my generation, right? For you to know that you are the pinnacle of what any of us is meant to aspire towards, and to know that you killed Muammar Gaddafi, that you put a bounty on Assata Shakur's head, like my heroes, you did that to them. There got to be something else that's beyond this Democrat thing that could really reflect what a true politic for Black liberation is. And I found that in the PSL. There's so many other organizations, but for me, I found that in the PSL.
So what kind of support? I mean, much has been made about how strong the New York DSA is in particular, that chapter, and how they contributed to mobilizing around Zoran and, AOC and other candidates over the years, helping with the door knocking efforts, et cetera. How are you feeling about the amount of support that PSL is able to provide? And how would you respond to questions about what your strategy is like to try to achieve your goals in this election, understanding that your goals might be something shy of winning, although I'm sure winning is not something that you want to take off the table?
Of course. Yeah, no, you mentioned earlier that there were thousands of people, 50,000 at least, right, if not more, that were mobilized to move out of their comfort zone and talk to their neighbors about something that inspired them. I think that there's way more than 50,000 people in New York City that are equally as passionate about putting forth a program like what we have here with this platform. And we want to work with them. We want to give them a vehicle to channel their energies that can actually produce tangible change, that can actually build power to have an option outside of knowing that the candidate that they vote for is ultimately going to have to, capitulate to the dominant billionaire forces. Those people need a place to be. And we believe that organization, specifically socialist organization, is the vehicle, is the home politically for anybody that has that as their objective. So, we want to offer an alternative. We want to offer a pathway for people who feel disaffected by, putting all this effort in, going out in the cold and in the rain, and then ultimately having their efforts materialize in something that is less than what they desire. I think we deserve to put our efforts and our labor towards creating a vision that actually we believe in, and not just something that is the best that's available for what's on the table.
But brass tacks, Andre, you know that this is the problem, and it's not just a problem that you face. It's been a part of the conversation within the DSA about how it mobilizes more Black and brown and lower income voters. Bernie got hit with a lot of bad faith attacks around this, but at the end of the day, it is a concern. How do you mobilize not just Black lower income voters and Latino lower income voters, but lower income voters across the board who vote at lower rates than higher income voters? There's the awkwardness of, Bernie throwing these rallies in the Bronx like he did after his heart attack almost exactly 6 years ago in October of 2019, and having one of the largest housing projects, maybe the largest housing project in New York next door, but this all white crowd that's busted from Manhattan. What is going on there? And you alluded to the fact that your district has low voter turnout earlier in this conversation. How do you start to change that? I mean, I hear you saying people are disaffected because neither political party works for them. The system doesn't work for them. It's a billionaire party. And that is all true. But describing the current reality isn't necessarily the same thing as offering a prescription for how to change it. Do you think just existing as a politician, as a candidate outside of the system is enough? How do you get people to know that you even exist? Do you encounter pushback around the label of socialist the way that so many centrists declare must be the case? I mean, what are these conversations like as you do start to take the temperature of what's going on in your district and knock doors and try to get volunteers to turn out for you, et cetera?
Yeah, no. And first I would say that this campaign is an extension of work that's already been underway in the Bronx, right, and in the five boroughs. Like we have been, actively participating in workers' rights struggles, various, contract struggles, UPS. So really talking where workers are and like meeting them where they are experiencing these conditions. The Bronx is famous for, having failed infrastructure, right? So talking to people about like what type of vision that they have really helps us to have a better sense of like how people respond to the messaging that we're putting out, which is why like the language is like very intentional and very deliberate with the things that we put forward in our platform. But in reality, I mentioned earlier, there's this expression that revolutions are primarily intellectual endeavors, right? So first you have to change the way that you think about yourself, and that's not a process that happens quickly, right? It took 2 years of daily action for the question of Palestine to be brought into the mainstream in a way that allows people to actually have a more nuanced or a better understanding of exactly what's happening, as opposed to just being afraid of being labeled falsely as anti-Semitic. So it took consistent presence and consistent action with the public education, speak outs, teach-ins, the mutual aid efforts. All of those things have to be necessary to raise the consciousness of the working class in order for them to be able to fight for what they deserve. So you or I could really sit down and talk about what we really think should happen. But if we're not in a space where we can actually access the working class and actually make these ideas tangible, then it's going to be hard for them to actually put that into motion. And I think that's a big part of what we aim to do with this campaign, is to talk to regular people about what they hope to see, and to give them a space to build with other people that also want to see that. And then from there, now this is something that you can bring to you. Now you can organize your building, right? Like, how can we figure out how to fight back against the landlords? Like, there's tangible things that can be done, but there's no real path forward that it comes from a singular figure, right? The only people that can liberate us is us, right? The working class has to be organized, and they have to get into a position where they're, and this is another piece that I wanted to talk about. Ritchie Torres recently said that like the people in the Bronx don't have time to care about what's happening in Palestine. And I fundamentally reject that, right? Again, as a Bronx resident my entire life, I've always known about the intertwined relationship that we have to things happening around the world, and the way that those forces impact us on a daily basis. I mean, many of us are immigrants that have family and loved ones that are directly in the places that are being, attacked, or suffering under U.S. foreign policy. Like we can never separate those things from our day-to-day experiences. And I believe that at the heart of it, the working class in this country is fully capable of understanding their position in the broader world and fully capable of acting to advance their own interests and the broader interests of the working class internationally. But so many of us are encouraged to think that all people care about is their own selfish interest, which again speaks to this idea of like cynicism, as I mentioned earlier. We have to be able to create a new humanity in defiance of this imposed humanity that encourages us to be selfish, encourages us to be defeatist, encourages us to be individualistic. We're so much more than that, and we always have been. And there needs to be spaces for people to come together and to come back to their humanity. And that's what we're offering. We're offering an invitation to struggle because we know that struggle is the only thing that has ever made any change in this country and in other countries. We have to work together.
I'm so with you. I stay with you, Andre, but I gotta drill down a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not expecting you to have every answer, but I do sort of want to know that we're thinking about this. Because if anything, again, if we're talking about goals of your campaign that might be something else or addition to the goal of winning, and maybe even more important than the goal of winning, it's kind of maybe cracking the nut of how you win as a leftist in a densely populated, because that's part of the story, right? That's part of the AOC story, that mobilizing and knocking doors is much more feasible in a place like New York than it is in Iowa, where there's miles between houses and you can't cover as much ground in the same amount of time. So how do you exploit that to your advantage? How do you break through from a messaging perspective? How do you make people want to invest in actually turning out for you? I mean, Zoran currently, for instance, is getting flack from champions of the working class, such as Batya Ungar-Sargon. That's a joke. Right-wing people who are trying to frame him as the rich person's candidate because they're at the middle tranche of higher income salaried workers. So people who earn between, let's say, $80,000 and $200,000 a year are like the bulk of his supporters, as opposed to lower income folks. And they're using that as, Zoran's for the rich, ignoring, of course, that all the billionaires, the actually rich people, are supporting Andrew Cuomo. And that's a bad faith attack, obviously. But it is also true that when you're especially in a borough like the Bronx, if you can't figure out how to access the lower income voters who predominate and to whom you're speaking to in terms of your platform, which we should get into. Sorry, I've had you here for an hour and not actually asked you to define your platform. But if you can't access those voters, if you can't change the reality that those lower income voters tend not to vote because they don't see themselves represented in the political system, then what are we doing? So I am curious, have you been thinking creatively? Have you and your team been sort of ruminating on what it would take? And do you have personal experiences from your family or your peers as you've been meditating on running about how to crack this nut?
Yeah, I think the question of like how to reach the lower income workers is definitely something that has, I think, plagued people organizing in the Bronx for decades. I think an advantage that we have is that one, we've already been meeting and talking to people in the Bronx and talking with workers in the Bronx about the things that they would like to see. We are, we have a team. The entire party is comprised of working class people. Like in New York City, it's all working class. It's multinational. I don't want to, deny that. But we draw support from people. Even looking at the success of the Claudia and Karina campaign, like there are so many people that were motivated to become more active in their local issues as a result of seeing somebody like Claudia, who is a Afro-Latina woman from the South Bronx, and recognizing that they have a space in the political sphere. Like I know that there are people that I talk to on a daily basis in my community that would love to see something that actually speaks to their conditions, um, actually on a platform for them to be able to bubble in it and to exercise at least that aspect of their political participation. But yeah, continuing to build our base and to have conversations with like everything that you see in our platform came through our experience working with people in the Bronx and talking to everyday New Yorkers on the train and like really hearing what their main issues were, dealing with housing, affordability, and just trying to, maintain themselves and map out a future for themselves. That's really what our platform is here to speak for and to give people a tangible outlet for.
Okay, I'm gonna get even more specific with
Yeah.
with the question. Do you know how many people turned out for Ritchie Torres in the last election? What turnout was like, and basically what the number it is you would have to hit to win?
I want to
I'm looking it up now.
yeah.
Okay, it looks like he got 130,000 in change votes.
Yeah.
Okay, the next highest vote was the conservative with 36,000 and change votes, and then Jose Vega got 4,000 votes. Okay, so we're aiming hypothetically for 130,000 votes. Do you know how many people are in the district? I think you said it earlier.
I want to say it's around 750,000.
Oh, sorry, that's obviously for the general election. Sorry, let me just pivot to the primary for a second. That's so weird. They have primary. They don't have those stats. Oh, here it is. My bad. Okay, so they have the primary numbers for 2020 for some reason over here. We'll just go with that. In the primary in 2020, he won 19,000 votes. And the next highest was Michael Blake with 10,000 votes. Okay, 20,000 is an even better number. And even easier for them to hit. Love that, 20,000. So this was part of the argument that was made, as I understand it, around AOC. Like she similarly, I think, had a low turnout. I think it was 19,000 votes or something. That's a number that if you have a certain number of volunteers, you can touch that number of people, right? If you have Zoran had 50,000 volunteers. You only need 19,000 votes. Like you're seeing how this math is going, right?
Yeah.
And in a world where there might even be cross endorsements and support. I mean, frankly, this is another problem with the Democratic Party. I don't imagine that you would get support from Zoran running outside of the party, which is maybe that's unfair to Zoran, but that's a tricky situation. But in an ideal world, a self-described socialist like Zoran says to you, who I believe is the only other socialist in the running against Ritchie Torres, here, let me at least send, even if I can't do a direct endorsement, let me encourage some of my volunteers to come help out with your campaign or whatever. And you can see how very quickly you can start to develop a strategy to get people to the polls.
Absolutely.
You can get the resources to start flyering, bodegas, etc., with well-designed posters a la Zoran. You can start to catch the interest of all of these tastemakers and social media people who happen to all be in New York and who did a lot to boost Zoran's campaign. We can have a conversation about money, as we did recently with David Sirota, and about how much Zoran was benefited by the existence of the public funding.
Yeah.
We can talk about things that you don't have, advantages that you don't have that Zoran did, which is ranked choice voting and running against. I mean, you do share running against a particularly evil opponent. But in Zoran's case, it encouraged alliances and cross endorsements and a ranked choice system that also was very advantageous to him. Right. So what I'm asking you is what you see as a sort of a path forward. What would need to happen for you to make a dent? And I'm asking that in part because I think listeners who are sympathetic to your effort also want to know what would be helpful to you. If they live in, Louisiana, they might say, well, if I send them this money, it could be used to run these ads and do these things or hire these employees or staffers, et cetera. If I'm in New York, I know how far my volunteer hours could go because of the demographic realities that I just described, and therefore I'm more inclined to want to come out and help stump for Andre. So talk me through a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. Being on this podcast, I think, is it's a really wonderful opportunity for us to be able to get our vision out, and the campaign available to your audience, who I would imagine would be sympathetic to a lot of the things that we support. And the piece of donating is another big thing, right? Because again, we are entirely grassroots funded. Like everything that we do, we have to account for. Like there are so many barriers within the process of like officially getting on the ballot and making sure that you're accounting for all of your spending. Like there's so many different things that discourage people from taking the independent route, which you alluded to earlier. But I think that is exactly why more people need to know about the campaign, because I don't think that there's anybody that would look at the idea of, lowering the rent as something that they don't feel, inclined to support, right? Like there's so many things about our platform that we know are popular to people, not just in our district, but around the country. And, we want to see more of these efforts. We've got a slate of candidates running, in Florida, in Massachusetts, in California, in Ohio. There's so many different efforts that we recognize have to be coordinated and organized together in order for them to be successful.
And when you say we, you mean the PSL?
The PSL, yes, the PSL, yeah. So I think that's really what I would want your listeners to know, is that like there's so many ways for us to support, and the success of our campaign, the ability for us to reach deep into the district is also a model for other districts to follow that may similarly be disaffected and feel dissatisfied with the political landscape in the place that they live, to know that there is an alternative, that you can actually engage with your people and build something that you believe in, but it also has the capacity to win and seize the political power. I think that's the biggest criticism that the left gets, is that the left doesn't win or doesn't want to win, which is why, we have this tension back and forth between what Zoran is doing and his capacity to win. It's like, we're rooted in this defeatism that it's like, well, we have to do what's going to get us across the finish line. And I think we spend more time talking about avoiding negative consequences and less time actually putting forth the vision that we know is necessary to meet the moment that we're in.
Not to make this the Zoran hour, but I did want to play you this clip from a recent live podcast taping that he did for the Hellgate podcast, in which he was asked about keeping Commissioner Tisch on board, because it does sort of tie in to this tension you describe between the desire to win and the perceived need to compromise your values in order to do so. This is one of the most direct questions that I've seen him get from a left perspective to challenge the approach that he's been taking of late.
Speaking of billionaires, let's talk about Jessica Tisch. That was the big news this week. I mean, lots of people who support your candidacy care about criminal justice reform and reforming the NYPD. And for the past year, she has stood athwart that in many different ways. She wants to keep the gang database. She's pushing a crackdown on low-level offenses. She's ordering the NYPD to issue criminal summonses to deliveristas. I could go on.
She was the face of the effort to roll back discovery reform and bail reform, and now she wants to do mess with raise the age.
How do you square all of that with your choice to make her your next police commissioner?
I think there is quite a bit that applies in this answer, not only to Commissioner Tisch, but also to anyone working underneath the Adams administration. And that is the question of what is the directive of the mayor? And I have made this decision as a decision to further my very public agenda of delivering safety and justice. And so that means this is a decision to build on what she has done in entering Eric Adams's NYPD, where he stacked the upper echelons with corruption and incompetence. She started to root that out and also reduce crime, and also to create the Department of Community Safety, and also to disband the Strategic Response Group, and also to actually follow through on the exact agenda that we've been running on. And I'm someone who cares deeply about criminal legal reform. In Albany, have been on the front lines of many of the fights to retain much of the progress that was made. And I am going to be a mayor who will act in the same manner.
So she's going to reverse her position on all those things, or she's going to follow your lead in City Hall if she's your police commissioner.
I think everyone will follow my lead. I'll be the mayor.
Wow.
It feels like he's basically saying, well, trust me. I will have the authority and control to advance my agenda, including over people who have been part of the previous administration and been ideological bedfellows with the guy that I ran against and beat because he was very bad. And so there's this, we're being asked, I mean, in that instance, very clear, like directly, it's kind of just like a trust me, bro, sort of posture. I want to be fair.
Yeah, of course.
But I don't know how else to see that. How do you see it?
Yeah. I think the accountability piece is crucial, right? Because like he has to decide if he's going to be accountable to the people who bankrolled his ads and paid for the flyers that people could do the canvassing. Or does he want to be accountable to the people that actually did the flyering and the canvassing and the door knocking, right? And I think that that's a really difficult position for any liberal to be in, right? Because
I honestly think those are the same people. I think the people who bankrolled his campaign with public financing and the people who worked on his campaign I think that the question is, for whom is this actually?
Yeah.
Because it seems like he's already winning. Without it, I think a follow-up question could have been, well, for what purpose? Even if you believe what you say is true, that Tish will remarkably, like, magically fall in line. What is the point of even taking that risk? What is the value of keeping her on? Why are you choosing to keep her on, even when the optics of it are so bad? What's the upside? Who's asking for this? Who are you trying to mollify?
Exactly. And in addition, who bears the brunt of this type of policy, right? Like who is going to be the recipient of the negative aspects of maintaining this individual in that position with the power over the most well-funded police department like in the world, right? Like who, and we know who, right? It's going to be people in the Bronx. It's going to be the same kids that, are producing the culture that they're not even benefiting from. Like we know how these things historically have turned out. And I think that it's a really difficult space to be in, because as much progress that we've made in rehabilitating the idea of what socialism is, if this is the ultimate, similar to how Obama was like the pinnacle of like liberalism and progressivism, if a Zoran, administration, and again, we want to give space for him to actually deliver on the things that he said that he would. But if we know that the best that we can get is somebody who, facilitates the ongoing, immiseration and over-policing of Black and brown communities, then people are going to turn away from socialism if that's what they think socialism is. And I think that people have to have, the opportunity to see what a socialist vision can look like, and to actually activate themselves in working to create block by block, neighbor by neighbor, conversation by conversation, the type of movement that can actually push Zoran in the direction in favor of those same underserved and disenfranchised voters that we often see in the Bronx, right? So we cannot separate the two. I don't think that there is one, you can do one while forsaking the other. Like we have to continuously advocate and talk to the lower income working class people about what vision that they have and how they can actually go about getting it. But the current condition keeps so much of us working just to survive that many of us don't feel like we have the time to organize and to have these conversations, which is why you end up with a disproportionate number of people who have higher income earners who have a bit more flexibility in their schedule to come out and do this canvassing and this door knocking. So we believe that we have to go where these people are, right? Like, so when in recently, when there was a major fire in Allerton Avenue, we went and spoke to the people there, and we were able to get resources and deliver them, like, personally to the people, and talking with them about the need for a broader system that does not allow landlords, corporate landlords, to just be absentee and just collect rent and not make any meaningful repairs on the housing that they have to live in, that the price they don't control, but they have to deal with the conditions that are existing in there. So we believe that talking to people and being able to connect them to these issues of over policing, of mass incarceration, of all of these these drug task force that they have that are primarily targeting Black and brown young Black men and women, that we have these ICE raids happening. All of these things are interconnected, and they're at the root of the capitalist mode of production. And the profit motive necessitates that there is a certain population that is constantly suffering, ready to be exploited, to completely, just to pad the interests of an increasingly small few of people, group of people in this country and in this city particularly.
I'd be interested to see, apologies if you've done this already, but I'd be interested to see your version of the man on the street interviews that Zoran launched his campaign with, and talking in this sort of language and seeing how it goes over. I saw that Jose Vega tried his hand at some of those types of interviews as well. I think, one, there's viral potential in them, obviously. But also I'm interested in, what was so, I think, radicalizing to the mainstream about Zoran's, interviews with Trump voters is this one presumption of, it undermined this belief in who Trump voters were because they were so diverse. And then why they voted for Trump. So, like, the fact of their non-whiteness, I think, challenged mainstream conventional wisdom that racial animus was the primary driver. Of course, you can be racist and non-white, but, hating Black people is probably not the motivation for a Black person to vote for Trump. Everyone's not Uncle Ruckus, Sure. And then also the fact that so many of them were repeating these economic concerns. I would like for you, additionally, I would like to see what it looks like for you to be using some of this more explicitly socialist language, and just to see, I'm curious what the reaction is, because dispelling the mythology around a knee-jerk response to socialism, when we do live in a world where, as you pointed out, Donald Trump feels like he has to up the ante to capitalism because socialism is too popular. I would like to see that try it out on the ground. What is your platform?
Yeah, for sure. In a nutshell, at the heart of the reason why I'm running is the system of capitalism fundamentally relies on a denial of consent. We don't get to, as working people, decide how our wealth or labor is distributed. And we are the ones who put the power into this nation, the greatest nation the wealthiest nation on the planet. So we should have that as at our disposal. So, number one, lower the rent at the top of our platform, right? This idea of public housing over private profit, taking emergency action for sky-high rents, addressing the lengthy backlog of repairs that are not done on NYCHA apartments. You saw recently there was a partial collapse over in the Mitchell houses in the Bronx. There's money in the budget for that, but it's not being allocated in the proper way. Raise the wages, right? Raising the minimum wage to $30 per hour, guaranteed, well-paid, fulfilling jobs for all. Forming a union a simple and democratic process, right? And also, combat the ability for bosses to use ICE as a way to threaten their workers and undermine their ability to earn a living wage, right? Because if I can just threaten somebody to come have you deported, now you're less likely to organize, which again lowers the wages for all workers, whether they are documented or not. Guaranteeing our safety, right? Recognizing that so much of the violence that we experience comes from, food insecurity, financial instability, but we have to create a pathway for young people to see a future for themselves. If there is no future, there's no hope, then we're not going to actually be able to make meaningful advancements against these concerns for our safety. Pushing for the accountability for, police misconduct. These are really, important things. Building a future for our youth, right? Having free childcare as something that is a requirement, right? Ending school district inequality, right? The school that I work in the South Bronx, we're constantly trying to find ways to maintain our funding from, month to month because of the current funding structures and, where we're located, right? Also, having higher education as a right. I teach high school. So many of my students don't even see themselves as going into college. They don't see the point of it. And it doesn't seem affordable. And they don't see the actual value of a college degree in the same sense, because many people that they know that graduated college, if they did, are in debt and are not working in the fields that they actually wanted to. So like there has to be a shift in how our funding is distributed, right? So, youth enrichment, like giving young people meaningful outlets for their creativity and things to do aside from just trying to find a way to feed themselves. Like you're when that is the priority of your mind, it suppresses your ability to have the full use of your mental capacity, your creativity, your innovation. Yet our people, Black people, despite all of that, are continuing to innovate. But what could we do if we had the resources directed, towards those same people? Ending the health crisis, right? Healthcare is a top concern for most workers, right? Because our bodies are the only things that we have to exchange for the labor, for the wages that allow us to keep a roof over our head. So what would it look like if we actually had access to the medical care and the walkable cities? If we had actual meaningful regulation that prevented things like, Mott Haven is the considered like asthma alley, right? Where the hospitalization rates are 21 times higher than in other New York City neighborhoods. So if it's possible for any neighborhood, then it should be possible for the Bronx and District 15. Mental health care is a huge thing. I myself am personally connected to that. I studied, psychology undergrad because I wanted to understand what was causing people to do the things that they did. And I think that having access to mental health care would reduce, a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with in terms of homelessness, in terms of, what people perceive as, violence. It really is unaddressed needs that we have the tools and the infrastructure to address, but what is lacking is the material support. But again, also Free Palestine, which has to be on the platform anytime anybody gets in front of a microphone. The aid that U.S. provides to Israel directly correlates with the immiseration and the suffering of the people in Palestine and Lebanon and all the surrounding areas in West Asia. And get AIPAC out of Washington. We should, again, not a controversial thing in this stage, in 2025. We should not have people that are responsible for meeting the needs of the most underdeveloped, the most under-resourced district in the country, receiving $1.4 million from AIPAC. So make the rich pay, right? So slash the military budget by 90%, hold negligent landlords available. Fully fund art and culture, right? Again, I mentioned earlier that the Bronx is the shaper and the driver of so much culture, right? Salsa music came from this area. How beautiful, right? Why are the people that invented these genres that changed the landscape of the planet still subsisting under the same conditions that they were a decade ago, 2 decades ago? So, in a nutshell, that's what we want to put in front of the people. And we know that talking to our neighbors in the South Bronx, that they would resonate with that because these are issues that they care about deeply.
What's the best Bronx movie?
Ooh, man. I really like A Bronx Tale. Shout out to Terrell Hicks, also in Belly. I think I'm very old school in that regard. I love the old Bronx.
How old are you? May I ask?
I was born in '87, so what does that make me? 38. When you hit 35, you kind of stop counting. You know what I mean? Because
yeah, maybe that's true, but then 40 will sneak up on you real quick. Watch out.
Exactly, sucker punch you. Yeah.
Okay. My last question for me, Ritchie Torres, leans heavily into kind of personal identity as he's pitching himself to the public. Prior to the focus on Israel, obviously spiking after October 7th, the only other thing I really ever heard him talk about was being Black and Latino and gay. And that, I think, for a lot of folks, meant that he was progressive. He was able to skate by being perceived as more progressive than he was based on his voting record because of these identity factors. And I invite you to not over-index on that stuff in lieu of substantive politics, but to tell a little bit about yourself and how you grew up and like how you came to your own lefty politics in a sort of demographic context that we're told again and again is not especially progressive.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think, historically, the Democrats have been famous for, as you mentioned, over-indexing on the role of identity. And I think that we have seen that a person's identity does not necessarily equate to them actually being progressive at all, right? Like we had Lloyd Austin, who was sanctioning the bombing of children, 20,000 children, 28 kids per day for 2 years died because of tax funders, our taxes being used for that. So I think that the idea that a person's racial or ethnic or religious or cultural identity inherently makes them progressive is something that we really have to decouple. And I hope that the Obama era maybe made that more clear to us. But I think that we're still in the shadow of that because there's so much identity that gets foregrounded. And I think it, again, is insulting because it does not assume that Black and brown people are capable of existing beyond just white people with different colors, right? Like they have this idea that the entirety of us is our outward presentation. And I think that is a farce. But just to talk a little bit about myself, right? I'm the son of Jamaican immigrants, right? My dad was born in England to Jamaican parents and came here when he was 11. So he had a Black American upbringing in the North Bronx, went to public school his whole life, went to Clinton High School. My mom came here from Jamaica when she was 17 years old. And, she was a beautician for a part of her life. And then she worked as a home attendant towards the last part of her working before she retired. And my dad is a second generation electrician. So, really working class. Like I've spent so much of my time around, dinner tables talking with other workers about the issues that we're facing. But I had always tried to find ways to have some kind of an impact on my community. And that led me to teaching, right? So I started as, I said undergrad studying psychology. I minored in English. And then I started working in after school programs in the South Bronx and in Jamaica, Queens, almost always with, Black and Caribbean people. I was an athlete. I ran track for 13 years from I was 9 until I was 22. That's how I paid for college on scholarship.
What distances?
I was
short distances, huh?
So naturally I'm a half miler. So the 800 is my bread and butter. But
that's tough.
Yeah. I love Usain Bolt. I loved Michael Johnson, and I always wanted to be like the quarter mile. I wanted to do the quarter mile, and I wanted to run the sprints because that's where everybody watched those races. And I'm like, I want to be in a race where everybody. Yeah,
that's why I said you're gonna be a sprinter and the Jamaicans be sprinting.
Of course. So yeah. But my dad was also runner. My dad was, he ran a half mile, and that really is my event. But that's perhaps a story for another day. But yeah, fully rooted in the working class in the Bronx, in the Black working class in the Bronx. And it has informed my policies and my understanding, people like Walter Rodney, Maurice Bishop, obviously Malcolm X, Thomas Sankara, Amilcar Cabral, like Claudia Jones, of course, Kwame Ture, like so many of these luminaries, came through Africa and into the Caribbean. And those are the people that really guide my vision for what justice looks like, what liberation looks like for working people.
Well, Andre Easton, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you and getting to know you. I appreciate you spending so much time with us here today. I had printed out this New Yorker interview. Isaac Chotiner got his claws into Karine Jean-Pierre, who foolishly keeps sitting for these interviews where she just looks just goofy as all get out. All due respect.
No, for sure. Yeah.
But we didn't need that. We didn't need to pad this interview at all. So maybe I'll save that for a live stream or a different time. Let the people know where they can find more about you, volunteer for the campaign, check out your pretty snazzy looking website, and a really nice launch video that circulated on the internet as well.
Yeah, shout out to the comrades. I mean, everything that you see is the product of, working class people that volunteer their time and energy to make this happen. And there's nothing that we can't do when we are properly organized. But yeah, just to plug the website again, it's andreforthebronx.nyc. And from there, you can really see the donation link. You can see the sign up for volunteers, and we're going to be holding volunteer sessions throughout the Bronx and the 5 boroughs to really get people activated. I think that conversations like this are super important, and I wish more people were able to have it. And I think now is the best time to have that. So really, I learned a lot being on this podcast with you. Like you do a really good job of getting a sense of where all these forces are. So really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, Andre, and maybe we'll have you back alongside some of the other Torres opponents who have thrown their hat in the ring. I don't anticipate that there'll be very many opportunities for the three of you guys. So far, it's gonna be Delerney, you, Vega, and also isn't there another guy who had run against Torres in the past? I think there's going to be Michael Blake, something like that. Anyway, maybe I would love to facilitate an opportunity for you guys to all engage at some point in the future, because not now, I don't want to have that conversation now, but eventually there's going to be a conversation about how the left needs to consolidate behind somebody to actually challenge Torres in a meaningful way. And I don't want the default, frankly, to be we got to just pick the Democrat. So we'll be revisiting this in the future. Thanks again, Andre.
Yes,
Thanks to all of you who tuned into this podcast. You can get an additional episode of Bad Faith Podcast every week by subscribing to patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. Thanks for your support. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.